Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's CARE webinar. I'm Chiho, and today I'll be moderating this presentation. I'm very delighted to introduce today's speaker, Associate Professor Eugene Dairianathan, a dear colleague of mine here at the Visual Performing Arts Academic Group at the National Institute of Education. I'm going to read a little bit about Eugene's biography before we begin. Eugene's interests are in interdisciplinary perspectives on music and education, as well as musical practices in Singapore. He was lead author of a technical report based on an NAC grant, a narrative history of music in Singapore, 1819 to the present. He was also principal investigator for 2 education research projects on creative music making and popular music in schools. More recently, Eugene has contributed several entries for the SAGE Music in the Social and Behavioral Sciences and Music and Culture encyclopedias. Eugene is also co-author of First Steps to Music and The Joy of Music, which are Ministry of Education approved music textbooks for Singapore primary and secondary schools. We are going to begin the session with a pre-recorded presentation that Eugene will deliver, and that will take about half an hour. After which we will proceed to a Q&A. Please feel free to type in your questions as we go along, and or later on during the live Q&A, you can also ask Eugene some questions. Okay, so over to Eunice. Would you please play the recording?
Welcome everyone to a CARE presentation. It's called Resounding the Past, a reconstruction of selected repertoire played by the 2nd Straits Settlement Police Band in early 20th century Singapore. Let me introduce you to the team. There is Tan Yila on the left, there's Matthew with me, Matthew Ui, and Mohammed Yusri. Views expressed in this presentation are the research team's and do not represent the views of an or any institution. Some preliminary acknowledgements. This presentation acknowledges funding from an academic grant from the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, and you can see the NIE ACRF code. The Singapore Police Force Band, the legal owners of this collection, for permission to use excerpts in this presentation. Support and assistance from the National Archives of Singapore, who are custodians of this collection, for providing digitized scores. Basically, this presentation is about an account of the tasks, challenges, and solutions to the digital conversions of instrumental individual part scores and piano conductor part into full wind ensemble format and digital audio realization. Soundscapes through technological affordances of public performances in Singapore through the 2nd Straits Settlement Police Band, formed in 1925, and reflections of the place of technological affordances, local music heritage, and implications for school-based through IHL and community wind ensembles. It's an outline of what this presentation is about. So the SSPB repertoire could be broadly categorized into wind and ensemble arrangements of Euro-American instrumental and opera repertoire, musical theatre, and arrangements of miscellaneous music pieces with exotic themes, of which I will be playing one. And of course, in resounding, quite clearly we have the scores, but we have no means of locating physical ensembles at this point in time, and it would have been very time consuming. And so we, with the team, realized this through technological affordances, and I will explain that software. So the digital realization took 2 forms: the conversion of the individual instrumental parts into a hitherto unavailable full orchestral format, and the digital audio realization of selected repertoire. 215 pieces were provided for by the National Archives in the form of where they came, individual instrumental parts and a full piano conductor score. So Avid software was purchased to aid in the transcription, specifically Notate Me and Sibelius Ultimate. Notate Me was initially used to convert the part scores that were in Adobe PDF format into Sibelius scores. The various instrumental part scores would then be combined into a full wind ensemble score, and this would translate into a digital audio realization. You have a snapshot of what was involved with 3 pieces. If you see the deeply yellowed digital forms, you can see in what form they were in. And with Notate Me, there was the digital conversion. We experienced quite a number of challenges. I'm going to let you read that for a short while. Basically, and you will see some of this evidence in the scores when you hear and when you see the realization processes. And so here is the first realization of the Beggar's Opera. The Beggar's Opera, of course, historically was the very first most successful English-based opera, if you can call it opera, which challenged the frame of Italian opera in England. And it became such a well-known work in 18th century England. And so here are some of the conversion parts from the digital realization of the conductor's score to full orchestral score. And here's a clip to put it all together. Obviously, I'm not going to give you the whole Beggar's Opera because it would take a good 15 minutes, but you have an idea of the digital audio realization, which is important in this entire process. The second piece I wanted to introduce was Chu Chin Chow. It's got nothing to do with grass jelly in Singapore, but it has a lot to do with a very successful musical theatre piece in the UK. And so you can see the conductor's score and you can see the orchestral realization again. And here we have another excerpt. The third piece was another very successful musical in the West End called The Orchid. As you can see again, these were all the reconstructions done by the team. The team and I thought to add in the complement of repertoire, one of which was the two Hindus mentioned, and another one which was an Old War Horse by Beethoven, and that was the Fifth Symphony, Movements 1 and 2. And the Old War Horse. This will give you an idea of when some of this repertoire was played in Singapore. And I'm going to give you some time to have a look at these locations in Singapore. I should introduce you to the Second Straits Settlements Police Band. They was reportedly formed in 1925, and I'm using the word reportedly carefully because as I look through a lot of print media reports, some of those dates may not be entirely where they are. But the very first conductor, Inspector F.E. Mintz, was given an appointment in 1925. The band came together in 1926, and their very first performance was in 1927. And it is true that many of the musicians were taken from the Indian Army and brought to Singapore. And so when they were in the public at large, Paul Abishnigarden was referring to how it was the band for ordinary people. If Chief Inspector Mintz would have been long remembered for his part in the accompaniment for Gilbert and Sullivan productions, there was a way in which Gilbert and Sullivan returned to the ordinary people, because one of the opportunities for bandsmen to earn a little money on the side was to play. They got paid and they played for funerals. And Gilbert and Sullivan's selections were part of the accompaniment for the coffins on the way to burial. And as you can tell, a lot of F.E. Mintz's work was very much the way in which he worked with the Amateur Dramatic Society. And of course, the police band were there. The police band survived during the Japanese occupation, and it was called the Sionan Police Band. And the very locations that the band had been playing before the occupation were the very venues that the Sionan police or the Sionan government at the time decided to rely on from 1942 all the way up to 1944. And they even had a schedule of performances which came from, shall we say, the top. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about how the team and I managed to resound a past. I'm not talking about reviving, I'm talking about reliving and resounding. And here's a quotation about technology and affordances. We tend to think of technology and affordances as if they would replace, instead of rethinking that process of replacing as reliving and resounding. And as SIGOUT 2002 asks, what should be used as the basis for identifying operations? Our sciences or native knowledge? And the answer to this question depends on how well the one translates into the other. And here is where that critical question comes back again in reconstructing the past and making difficult but informed decisions in editorial processes in looking at the scores. You would probably have noticed how in Chu Chin Chow there was tape all over the original facsimile, which I only had a digital version of. And in that sense, trying to reconstruct something with torn pages, with tape all over the pages, or with hand marks, made the process of transforming digital scores onto software extremely difficult. And as a result, we were only able to arrive at 15 scores rather than the 215. But this is what the team and I came across. And we realized that technological affordances contribute to an informed reading and understanding of archival wind ensemble scores, in our case, individual part scores and piano conductor scores. How musical part scores were not entirely without deviations in terms of sometimes note inaccuracies, misaligned notes. And technological affordances enabled wind ensemble conductors to learn how to discern and make editorial decisions on discrepancies in the score, enabling their learning of harmonic and compositional skills, given their expert oral experiences in their practice. I should add at this point in time that in the team, Mohammed Yusri used to be the director of music at the Singapore Armed Forces Band. Matthew, who is on his way to his graduate studies in the UK, has written for Chinese orchestra and wind ensemble. And Tan Yila has done very much so in terms of her studies at NAFA, working with material like this. So they are not without their expert experience. And technological affordances illuminate repertoire, instrumentation, and orchestration for a uniquely emergent SSPB public performance soundscapes. Their reliance on a military journal is also a revelation of curatorial practices by a conductor who, as I found out quite recently, was a conductor with an army band. And it would not be surprising to see how a police band, a state security apparatus band, would be reliant on an army journal for source and resource for public performances. And as I said, it provides clues to social context surrounding music composed and published as much as contemporary as historical, with public dissemination as public ingratiation and repertoire building. Technological affordances short-circuit labor and time-intensive processes towards a physical realization. And now, the SSPB's public repertoire is now only a technological affordance away, albeit very time-consuming. And digital audio realizations contribute towards an informed understanding of Singapore's public musical heritage through the SSPB. Technological affordances also mitigate virtual, here I'm referring to Avid and Sibelius entities, with physicality as technology, with consequent behaviors and outcomes. If you had a real-life band working with these pieces, there would be reading, rehearsing, more rehearsing, and performing. Now you have digital realizations through these technological affordances. And technological affordances provide opportunities, visual and oral, for more inclusive forms of learning, formal, informal, and non-formal, for present and future wind ensemble participants towards physical performances. They now have an oral realization of something that they might be interested in taking up for a real performance in real time, in real space, for a real audience. So technological affordances into the present, not including AI software, may be able to scan scores better than Notate Me. Composers, arrangers, past and present, have had to make do with instruments, ensembles, and performers to play their music. Their instrumentation and emergent soundscapes demonstrate this adaptability. Note Performer references modern-day instruments. if future software could recreate the sounds of instruments in the 1920s with their tuning, temperament, and pitch definition of what constitutes A in terms of frequencies. We now work with A equals 440 hertz or A equals 442 hertz. What was it like in the 1920s? And so a past soundscape via future technological affordances offer a very valuable lesson in heritage soundscapes. So the repertoire performed by the SSSPB outreach concerts provide educational potential for researchers, conductors, wind ensemble participants, and audiences. This band, SPF band, will be 100 years in 2025. Evidence of sustained and sustainable musical history and heritage. And this is all the more amazing if you consider that this band came out of a state security apparatus outfit. And yet it sounds like, bad pun, but the right pun, that this is the band that has survived almost a century when others seem not to have. Now, Singapore's public funded education supports learners engaging in out-of-in-curriculum time. It's called co-curricular activities, of which the wind ensemble is one. Singapore's musical heritage is heritage, and if you pardon another slash in there, heritage, has potential value in educational capital in policy documents on mandatory, indicative, and dynamic repertoire in its public-funded general music program for schools. And on that note, I thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Fascinating presentation. Let's wait for him to come on. Hi.
Thanks, Shihu. Technology with all of its interesting insights does provide some irritating moments too.
Yes, right up to just before this presentation, shall I say?
Yeah.
Okay, so I am trying to see if there are some questions, but maybe I will begin by asking a couple of things that I was really curious about. Actually, I was wondering why is the SSSPB of interest to the research team in the first instance, right? Because there are other musical ensemble of course that you could have looked into. So that's just first question, why SSSPB? And also, I guess, how were decisions made? Because you said that there were 215 possibilities, right? But so in the end, you chose 15. So what were the decisions behind choosing those 15 as well? Yeah.
Thank you, Gio. I think the first of my concerns was it's been 17 years waiting for a door to be opened. I had written to the Singapore Police Force Band hoping for light at the end of the other tunnel in 2006. I never got an answer. And, you know, if the Singapore Police Force Band would like to respond, that would be great, but I am not going to belabor the point. What happened in 2018 was I was invited by Channel News Asia to shed light on Chu Chin Chow. And it was one of our former students, Muhammad Rasul, who interviewed me in that entire process. And it made me realize that, hey, this collection actually resides in the National Archives of Singapore, meaning that I don't get blank silence anymore. I actually get a position where the National Archives are now custodians of the collection. And to be honest, Chihu, I did raise the issue in a research grant proposal during COVID, and I was told by the National Heritage Board please go ask the police band for funds. And it was curious because at the end of the day, it was the National Institute of Education grant fund that supported me through a whole process of rejection from 2006. And I'm not going to belabor the point about who to blame. I'm just going to talk about the positive side of it, which is what you've seen in the presentation this evening, which is the National Institute of Education enabled me to put together a reconstruction of sound. We could call it an archaeology of sound of a life that had happened in the 1920s and the 1930s. And I am totally grateful to the National Archives to help me get to that point. So what can we say, Chihu? Persistence pays. Sometimes at what price, at what cost? The more important outcome would have been we got there. We got 15 pieces out of 215 pieces, not knowing what we were up against. And I can tell you, my team members in the research team worked completely tirelessly towards getting that realization. And to your second question, what was that? Sorry, Chihu.
How did you select those 15?
Curatorial practice is always very interesting. It's always very easy for us to simply say, right, we will choose out of the 215 whatever we like. In our discussion with the team, we discovered there was specific repertoire. There were, if you could call it that, reconstructions of classical repertoire, Beethoven, Wagner, and of course, Gilbert and Sullivan stand somewhere in the middle. But there was also musical theater from the West End. And there were also very interesting snippets of what we would call exotic repertoire. And we found these three sort of broad classifications appropriate ways in which we could understand the curatorial practice. According to Inspector Mins, he was more concerned with classical music and light opera, as he called it. So our three classifications became two in his view in the 1930s. So in that sense, we tried to grasp as much of an inclusive repertoire that the police band would have been playing. And mind you, and this will be interesting because there is a chapter which is going under review right now. But I will say this right now. There was repertoire that enabled young children from various locations to sit in big lorries, come over, listen to the Second Straits Settlements police band in those lorries to classical music and light opera. And I'm talking about young children.
Yeah, that's incredible. And actually that leads to my second question very nicely, because I was really fascinated to see where these repertoire was performed, right? And so I saw like Waterloo Street, Fair Park, and Katong Park as well. So do you have any idea? I mean, I guess you've plowed through the archives of like, was it purely for community outreach, or was it also linked to like particular police events? I know, of course, later on it became the Ho Sionan police band thing, which was yet another angle. Yeah.
Well, we could call that a political hot potato because
right.
No one ever mentions in the Singapore Police Force band the Sionan Police Band, right? We recognize the Sionan Symphony Orchestra, we recognize the Sionan General Hospital and the Sionan Police Band, and this is something that some hard scholarship will need. and I will have to suffer the consequences if that happens. But let's go back to your earlier question. The police band was an interesting amalgamation of different agendas. And the police band became what it was because the municipal commission, today we call them the city council, I don't know what we call them after 1951, but in a sense, they knew what they had in terms of a regimental band providing, what should we call it? Free service for community band work. And after a while, one of the problems that emerged was the presence of the need for a bandstand, which at that point in time, the Singapore government or the Singapore Municipal Commission had no clue about. We were dealing with administrators who knew they wanted community service. Band stands were not part of that situation. And there were some regimental bands who, when they performed, were up close and personal. I mean it literally, to our immigrant and migrant resources in Singapore. So you could literally have a sweaty palm touching someone in the band without any proper protection, a bandstand, or any infrastructure at all. The second component was what Arjun Appadurai would call finance-scapes. You could have a band already stationed in Singapore. The problem was how you converted and monetized that into community service. And that was one of the difficulties that the Municipal Commission had pre-Triple SPB, because they had no idea how it was going to work. They worked with itinerant musicians, amateur musicians who are policemen during the day, and then what can we say? They were musicians by night, and quite clearly there were issues involved in terms of how do you get a community band to work in Singapore circumstances under the guises of a municipal commission and yet be valuable to your day job and practice and be an excellent musician.
Thank you for that.
Okay, I'm sorry if this is going to get anybody into trouble, but I am
No, that's fine. Yeah, yeah.
I'm
No,
totally
I mean, this whole idea of side gigs, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
still pretty much a thing now, still, right? Everybody
Yes.
does that. Yeah, yeah. Which maybe I should pause for a while and see if there are any questions, because otherwise I'll just dominate the whole question Q&A
You're
session.
more than welcome to do.
Is there anyone who has a question for Eugene? Because I'm not seeing anything on the chat. So if you would just raise yes, Ollie. Yes, please. You're muted.
Do you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
So I am a Swedish musicologist, and I would be interested to hear Eugene talk a bit about the archaeology of music, since this to me seems to be a kind of two-layered type of power music orchestra playing for people who were unaccustomed to these traditions. So firstly, there were police, and the second, they were playing a type of very European kind of music that had to do with the army and the police. And do you have any inkling about how this could have affected the listeners in the 20s and 30s and onwards? Please.
Thank you, Professor Edstrom. It's wonderful to hear you from Sweden in the afternoon. And I thank you for your questions, because when I was pondering over the curatorial practice, our first inclination of a band in Singapore was probably in the 1870s, where it was a marching band. And with the marching band, you would have had marching band, drum major kind of repertoire. And quite quickly, when I think the Municipal Commission discovered an interest in this, and particularly an interest among the public, they thought to themselves, let's consider how we could convert marching band into a community band. And there were movements ahead. There were lots of discussions in the municipal council of how the community band could be arrived at. And it was, how do we say it, Professor Edstrom? A kind of apologia. And the apologia was, there is a military band, there is martial music, and it incites a public to be interested. Let's do more of the same. And when you have more of the same, then you realize that the Municipal Commission realized that, okay, we should have martial music because it puts people together. What's that phrase in French? Esprit de corps. It puts people together. And when that happens, of course, you have a municipal commission driven by an agenda. And when we look at the beginnings of the Second Straits Settlements Police Band, we always ask this ridiculous question, as I did, Professor Edstrom, why a police band? They're public law and order. What have they got to do with community service? But I came across a very recent detailed article about the finances of how it would finance a community band. And surprise, surprise, the police band was the lowest of three quotes. Oh, actually, yes. I don't care if I'm going to be sacked for this, but actually it did turn up to be that, because in the discussions on a special report with the Municipal Commission, that's exactly what they said. It was cheaper to invite the police band if we could get their buy-in to be a community band while serving their regimental interests. So for all the wrong reasons, Professor Edstrom, the Straits Settlements Police Band were the right band.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
June, I think you have a question.
Hello.
Hi, June.
Hello. I'm also coming in from Sweden.
Uppsala.
Yes, I'm in Uppsala.
Yes.
So thank you very much for the very fascinating presentation. And so my question for you is, I find it very fascinating that in the scores, one of the pieces has 6 flats. And so the issue with band players today and band conductors performing is that there may be a conscious decision to is a double-edged sword, where do we feel this piece with our musicians, and our musicians will also have to put in a lot more work working through the section with 6 flats, moving between from one flat and 3 flats. So this is an intonation question, where what are the pros and cons of technology today, AI, with respect to our musicians' capability development. Yeah, thank you.
June. Thank you. I think for most of us as keyboardists, 6 flats will freak us out. We generally tend to avoid anything that has got too many flats. But if you're a brass band performer, you start in B flat. Six flats is no biggie, if you want to put it that way, because they're all used to beginning with C as B flat, or C as E flat, or in the horn, C as F. And one of the things that always struck me was about our ignorance of the band tradition, the brass band tradition. And, I'm really thankful I had Muhammad Yusri, the former director of music at the Singapore Armed Forces Band, on team, because we spent a long time debating these issues. And in that sense, it also helped us to recalibrate our notions of six flat, five flats, seven flats, and so on and so forth, in terms of what it would have been in the notion of a brass band player. Number two, when the Indian Army bands merged, I'm told 32, I wish they wouldn't use the word Sikh, because Sikh is a religion, Punjabi is an ascription, and when you discover that they were mostly Punjabi musicians from formerly established Indian Army bands, that these gentlemen were put through the paces. I'm talking about 3.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, under strict supervision. I am informed by press media, they were, their English was halting, their musical skills were there, their performance skills were wanting, and therefore the very first Inspector Mins literally handheld each one of them. It would go some way to explain why there were markings on the individual scores for individual parts. Whether it's in red ink, blue ink, black ink, whatever. Basically, he had to make sure that when they turned up in 1926, after they were brought in, after a search in India, that they had 6 to 9 months to prepare for a performance, which actually was realized in March 1927. And here we now start to get into the reconstruction. It's funny that we talk about the reconstruction, we're thinking simply of reconstruction from part scores into to full ensemble scores, which we as the team would never have realized what kind of struggles these performers would have had to endure in practicing, rehearsing, somebody's over your shoulder, rehearsing until a performance is realized. And in a sense, I'm sorry to say we're at the tip of an iceberg. So you've put me in a spot, June, because the longer I realize how much of this, and unfortunately there is no scholarship on this except in print media. And so print media has now become my default research portfolio. How much can we believe public media today? We have TikTok, we have all kinds of wonderful stories. What do we call them? Amplifications of the truth. Now, in the 1920s and 1930s, we actually hear evidence of repertoire, of the ways in which these musicians, with halting English, with basic musical skills, and with an army, a former Royal Sussex Regiment bandmaster, responsible for getting, I hate the word as well, but Professor Edstrom will understand this, because people were spoken of in somewhat disparaging terms. Catty Sikhs. I'm quoting a source. So if the Singapore Police Force Band would like to say something to me after this in a conversation, I'm happy to quote the source. Tatty Sikhs. And these were gentlemen from the Indian Army who were positioned in such a way that they would become the most sustaining force. And amazingly enough, when the Japanese occupation took place between 1942 and 1945, guess who they picked? It was renamed the Sionan Police Band, and our conductor was Mr. Ganda Singh. This takes us all the way back to Max Weber and the technological, redeployment of forces. You don't change the personnel, you change the way in which it happens. And if you look at the way in which street and stage opera were performed during the Japanese occupation, there were ways in which the old colonial structures were adapted, or should I say, accepted, in terms of how the Japanese simply used old colonial structures for their own purposes to make sure that the Chinese communities were, shall we say, assuaged.
Wow. Eugene, is it okay if I put the other research team members on the spot and just kind of ask them if they have some thoughts? Because I mean, you've put down some reflections from the team. I'm just wondering if Matthew or Yusri or Ila,
by all means, please.
If they want to say something, that's.
We should ask
Yusri?
you. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Yusri.
I'm a bandmaster. Come on, Yusri.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Sorry, Dr. Lang, sorry for Prof. Lang. What was the question again?
Just if you had any, further thoughts about what's been presented in terms of the reflections and or challenges that you've encountered that was not mentioned today.
No, I thought Dr. Eugene mentioned quite everything that we went through. I think it's so tedious, the work of converting the scores the past into the scores, because of the way they were when we got them, and we had to make sure that the chords are right, the notes are right, and then of course with we're trying to realize the sound. We have to think about we have to think about dynamics. We have to think about the balance between the parts as well. So because we wanted to make it as realistic as possible. So it's when we just put it out there, right? You just play the score without any kind of sound editing. It will sound quite bland, quite unpolished and unbalanced in terms of sounds. Some parts will be too loud, some parts will be too soft. So there's a lot of things that we had to tweak to make it sound quite realistic, to make it more realistic. So that took a lot of work. That's why we did 15 only. But we wanted to make sure that the 15 were very high quality products and not just just work transpose and put into the score and just play it out. So yeah, but I thought it was a very good experience for all of us. For me, it was an eye opener, especially because being in the SCF band and working very closely with the police force band, knowing exactly what were played in 1920s and 30s was great, because it brought back to our heritage and how things were, in those days, and how we are right now, and the transformation since then. Yeah.
What you're not saying, Yusri, is how you spend time in Nella Hall, transcribing scores and having to do some of this transcription work.
Yeah, I was very lucky to get that scholarship. I think because when I was in Nella Hall, I was actually very fortunate as well. Nella Hall, if you're not sure what Nella Hall is the Royal Military School of Music, where the British sends their musicians and bandmasters for training. I was sent there to be trained as a bandmaster. And I was very fortunate because I was actually stationed in the library as part of my duty. So I get a chance. I saw all those scores from 1800s. I was like, whoa, this is like a gem of, like a treasure trove. So yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about transcription, listening to balance and everything, making sure that everything sounds good enough, I would say. So I was very lucky in that sense. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Wondering if Matthew and Ela has anything, but maybe I'll just put up another question. This is just my ignorance. What is the current status of the police band? Actually, how has the repertoire changed over the decades? I mean, since you're looking at it across, right? Just curious.
Thank you for asking that question, Chihu, because when I was looking at, and of course, when one talks about a community police band, one cannot avoid a transition from um, an Anglophone discourse. Matthew just reminded me to be very careful with what I'm saying, but um, it's too late in my life to be careful. He said, "Be careful, don't offend anyone." I'm not offending anyone. I'm citing sources, if you want to put it that way. We had F.E. Mins, we had J.C. Hitch, who was actually stationed in India and could speak Hindustani fluently, who had, before the war, a complete Punjabi outfit. And then the Japanese occupation happened. I'm still wondering to myself why the Japanese occupation and Sionan police band are not reflected in ethical historical discourse. Because the Japanese relied on this band of Punjabi gentlemen to actually promote band practice. Of course, there would have been repertoire in there. And I have to say that Chu Chin Chow survived during the Japanese occupation. You would have thought that no British musical theater would have survived during the Japanese occupation. And guess what? I have evidence on print media that Chu Chin Chow was actually played during the Japanese occupation. So there we are, But if you think about it in the longer term, there was a handover to R.E. House, who actually began the notion after the war and converting an all Punjabi outfit into a more Malay outfit. And it was James E. Boyle who turned up in the 1950s, being on Radio Malaya, and eventually when Inspector Mulok, who Muhammad Yusri will remember, became the very first localized band director of the Singapore Police Force Band in what the press called the true Malayanized police band. All right, you read into it what it will. I'm quoting a source. If we're heading towards cultural essentialism, I am not part of that agenda. It just so happens that that was what print media discovered. And by the time that Inspector Mulok turned up, they were not playing, they may have been playing Mozart and Beethoven and so on and so forth. But in 1978, there is a print media a description of their work where they were playing Herb Albert, and the Tijuana band, right? So how you explain to me how a truly Malayanized police band plays Cuban salsa, and quite clearly, we miss the point about how Shaw Brothers Theatre in Malay film industry and Malay film productions worked with Latin American resources, and how many of these Malay musicians were probably housed in cabarets, and how these things came to be, and how newly formed, shall I say, reformed police band had resources that drew on Malay film industry of P. Ramlee, localized, and it gave people in the press either twisted ideas or different ways in which to understand how a police band would then become a public band. And there is a long narrative from when F.E. Min said, I'm going to do classical music and I'm going to do light opera, and you had better listen. Till the point where when he retired, he said, our local community were more interested in jazz. And Professor Estrom will laugh because Yortibog entertained Duke Ellington and many of these other communities. And as we work towards a later dimension, I mean, certainly during the time of the Japanese occupation, they played anything that was pro-Japanese. If you can excuse Chu Chin Chow, it somehow seems to have missed their mark in a way towards a sense of a communitarian curatorial repertoire. So Herb Albert and the Tijuana Band was something more contemporized within their curatorial practice. I can tell you this personally because at the opening of the National Stadium, of which I was a participant in, the Singapore Police Band played Three Dog Nights, Black. The world is, sorry, I'm gonna get this. Yes, it's Black and White, I think, by Three Dog Night. They were the latest pop band during a time when pop bands were a difficult entity in Singapore. So someone fact check me, Three Dog Night. Go on, Yusri, you're laughing. Three Dog Night. That came out of EMI in 1973, and the world is black, the world is white, the child is black, the child is white, and all of a sudden we discovered that the Singapore Police Force Band was the closest you could get to a public radio station.
Fascinating. It's incredible. Well, Eugene has all these in his brains. So it's great that we're hearing this. And I'm sure there's a lot more, right? I mean, in terms of then its progression until, I guess, this point in history. And so this,
what is interesting, of course, is how they move from I will play to you. It means,
that's right.
What can I play for you?
Yeah. And that's a, great shift in terms of that agency, right? Towards, Gene has a question.
Go on, Gene.
Hi, sir. Good morning. Good evening. Hi, everyone. So my question is, so they call themselves the Straits Settlements Police Band. So did they do any tours?
Settlement Police Band. Second Straits Settlement Police Band.
Yes, the second Straits Settlement Police Band. Did they tour like Malacca, or did they tour Penang, or are there any like communications, or are there like other bands in all these locations also?
I have Matthew warning me that if I say anything anymore, I'm going to be called to tea somewhere, but I don't care. The point, Gene, and it's an excellent point. The second Straits Policeman Band, Triple FPB, played in Singapore. I now have evidence. Let me just make sure that I get my 31st of October, 1937. I finally found admission that there was a first Straits Settlement Police Band, and it was a drum, bugle, and fife band by a gentleman called Inspector W.P. Barsby, who was the technical director of St. Joseph's Institution. So if there are any SJI alumni in here, up high, right? And they were the ones who went out to Penang for Police Sports Day across Malaysia to invite Malay recruits. I'm quoting a source, so I have no fear about being arrested. As far as I'm concerned, this is evidence on print media. The first Straits Settlement Police Band, bugle, fife, and drum, which we never hear about, actually was the very first that appeared in 1923. They played for police pass-out parades. They played for many events. They went all the way to Malaysia to recruit Malay recruits. Okay, if this begins to sound like cultural essentialism, I'm quoting a source. I'm distancing myself from observation versus judgment. So you're right, Gene.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll just wait for a little bit if there are any other questions. If not, actually, I might close here because this is wonderful reliving, resounding, and actually retelling through digital means. And Eugene has such a treasure trove of knowledge, as I've said. You know, it's wonderful to always engage with you, and it's just
Well, you know,
so many things.
You know, Prof. Lam, I'm only quoting sources.
Yes.
As all scholars must, rather than pretend that they know everything that is there and pretend that they are now the new authors and authors of knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm only quoting sources.
So true, with interpretations as well.
Oh yeah, okay.
Okay, well, anything you want to say before we end the session, Eugene? Maybe something, or the research team? Some
Okay,
final
Gila,
thoughts?
Matthew, come on, speak up. I've already put your faces out there. You'll end up on Facebook, you'll end up on Twitter, oh no, it's called X now, right? It's not Twitter. Yeah. And you'll be on Instagram. So Matthew, Gila, please. I've named and shamed you.
Yeah, there we go, Matthew.
Go on, Matthew.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm actually in a not very conducive place right now because I was displaced out of my hostel due to bed bug treatment.
It happened in first world England. Okay, sorry. I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, it's preventive, so they're actually going through all the rooms today. So I'm homeless for the next 5 hours.
Okay. I'm sure Junkai in Uppsala doesn't have the same problems because in Sweden they would have sorted this out.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I was very honored to be able to be on this project together with Dr. Eugene. So I mean, when he first came to me with the idea, I was able to apply the knowledge that I already knew with regards to Sibelius, because that was what I generally used to compose my own music. So we were able to go through that and then work through the teething issues before Ela and Yusri came, so that we could actually. So by the time that Ela and Yusri came, actually, the process was slightly a little bit more streamlined. So instead of 10 works, maybe by the end of 8 months, it became 15. Yeah, so actually that was a really good progress that we made. I mean, of course, Dr. Eugene always says that he wishes he could get more money to finish the other 200, but I think manpower and financial wise, it's not too feasible. But yeah, I think with regards to, maybe if I could just add on to what Dr. Eugene and Yusri have already said, with regards to the editorial decisions, as Dr. Eugene likes to call them, I think it doesn't just depend on our experience as maybe composers or ex-bandsmen or band conductors. I think it also depends on what we could see on other part scores. So for example, with reference to other parts, do they have the same notes? Are they playing a particular chord? If we look at the full score, is there a voicing that we're supposed to follow? I think all these contributed into evidence of what is supposed to be played. And for those that we weren't able to sort of identify with whether it was correct or not, we actually just transcribed it as it is. So if you listen to some of them, if you listen to some of the full recordings, you actually hear some dissonances, depending on how closely you're listening to. But those are there because we do not know whether it was the composer's intention or whether or not it was just a publication mistake, because we all know that maybe in the 1940s, 1950s, publications aren't as they were today. I'm not sure how they published it then, but definitely publication mistakes are prevalent everywhere. So yeah, we really had to rely on different parts as well as our own compositional knowledge to make all these editorial decisions. Yeah, not only that, actually a lot of the, I mean, even if bands were to play it today, we are actually worried about whether or not bands have enough people to cover all the instruments. And also we also need to think about the missing parts that were actually not given to us as part of the scores from the National Archives. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Gila, please.
I just thought it was a very nice opportunity to work on this because it's interesting to see how the history comes alive. Because yeah, I used to be in band also, so I was quite interested in all
Which
this.
instrument did you play, Gila?
I used to play the trumpet. Yeah,
B flat.
yeah. So I just thought it was very fun to work on it, although it can be quite tedious because the scores are really in bad conditions. Yeah. So there is always tapes and like broken pages. So that's the tough part. But in the end, it's all okay because I managed to ask like Matthew and Yusri like what should we do? So yeah, we managed to all fix it in the end and come up with solutions.
Thanks, Gila.
Ah,
Please go
all
ahead,
these, yes.
Prof. Edstrom.
It struck me that it was very wonderful to hear these resoundings of this probably 1925 renditions, but it strikes me as it might be a rather picky musicologist question here. Is it better than reality? I mean, how do you, but that might be a good thing for you if you have to raise more money. You could show the people here how the wonderful orchestra we had in the 1930s and 20s, etc. Because we have this problem all the time. How could it really sound? How many of those musicians did play false music, false notes here and then? And again, I don't know what to do about this problem, but there is this problem around, of course.
So, Professor Edstrom, thank you so much for that question. One of our colleagues here was Dr. Wong Jun Huang, who finished a complete excerpt of the Jungle Book Cycle by Percy Granger. Dr. Wong, would you let us know what your problems and prospects were? Because you tried to get an American university band to perform the Jungle Book Cycle in its complete edition, which is there in your PhD.
Okay.
I think it was a very tough process for me because even I had like 60 years worth of score to look at. It was slightly different from your situation, I think. And also like it's a lot of handwriting, it's handwritten scores. So it was even more challenging. I mean, from the material I saw that you guys have presented was
But it
actually
didn't stop you from putting together a complete Jungle Book cycle, which is the very first in the world.
Really?
Right?
yeah, but
Unfortunately, the ensemble that was supposed to perform for you happened during the time of the global financial crisis.
it's just the wrong,
Surprise, 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 surprise.
it's just the wrong time. It's all right. You know,
Right.
there's always opportunity.
But you see, that's exactly what Prof. Edstrom's point is about. Do we want to simply sit down and say, we will do ChatGPT and generative AI and say, okay, we can now convert all of this into generative AI and let's forget about the physical human? What would you say to that, Dr. Wong?
Whoa. I think ChatGPT is good, but
No. Professor Edstrom's point was, where do you have real performers reading scores and performing for real audience? We all know what ChatGPT can do. That's lame.
I think same thing with the technology part where I can realize it putting on the scores itself and then they can play back like what you guys are doing. But I think nothing beats the direct touch and playing live. That element is missing and you know what I mean, right? Basically, I still prefer live concert, live performance.
That's precisely Professor Edstrom's point. If we're going to leave it to ChatGPT, we might as well sit down, stare at our YouTube and Twitter and Instagram media and say, okay, all of this was produced thanks to digital transformation. I can see Muhammad Yusri's face thinking, I've wasted all my life as a band director. And Matthew is smiling because he said, I'm okay either way. And Yila is saying, I'm a scholar here. Don't trouble me about these controversial issues. But you know, Dr. Wong, have you ever tried to get a band to re-perform your Jungle Book cycle?
Yes,
You
I
have.
tried. Yeah, I tried.
And
it's just very costly. It is just very costly.
all right, talk to me about
Well, we can think about as a possible future project. I'm gonna stop everyone here today. Otherwise, it will be
Please
an
let me
endless-
involve with that, Ken. Thank you, sir.
Yes. No,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for everyone for showing up today.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eugene.
you're welcome.
Thank you,
If
Prof.
anyone causes you grief, please refer them to me. I will take all responsibility because I already said that in my initial slides.
There will be no issues.
Okay.
Thank you again. That's a
Thank you.
wonderful
Bye-bye.
presentation. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Everyone,
Goodbye,
for the
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.